name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. The sun is striking the house, and so it's time to film. We're slowly getting away from a long amount of time when I can film because it's very gloomy. It's been snowing a few times already, so let's get to it. This is an October wrap-up of 53 books, so I may well cut this video in half depending on what happens. However, a bunch of these either have videos coming or there's videos released of them already, so it might be quick, we never know. We'll see. The first book is The Listeners by Jordan Tannahill, which set a high note for the month for me. I rated this 5 stars. A video is coming on it because it's a Giller Prize book and I've been reviewing all of them. I have all but 2 done, I think, now, but they're going to be spaced out for like at least a month. The Listeners is about a woman who starts hearing a hum and is sort of like being driven mad by it, essentially. She can't diagnose what it is, neither can physicians. She finds a group of people who are likewise hearing this, and it's a very eclectic group. It functions kind of like AA, where they're all trying to figure out how this thing has affected their lives, deal with it, support each other. The interactions are amazing. The concept is great. It's very well executed. It has a lot to say about in-groups and out-groups of society. It has a lot to communicate, period. It is exceptional. The next book was a low point of the month. I gave it 1 star, DNF'd it at 24%. The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This was a long setup for a heir who is, unbeknownst to the family, selected as inheriting something, but she has to jump through a few hoops in this rich family, and it was uninteresting to me, so I moved on. I then read Utopia Avenue, David Mitchell, part of my David Mitchell project, the last book in all of his series, and I have a video out on that already, so I'll link it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it's the weakest book that he has written, yet strangely I liked it quite a bit because of all the connections to all the previous novels that I had read. If it had been my first David Mitchell novel, I think I would have been not prepared to continue with his other books and kind of left in the dark. For instance, The Book Chemist read Number 9 Dream and Cloud Atlas and didn't pick up on any of the connections in it and didn't like the book. So I then read Slaughterhouse-Five by Vonnegut, and that was great. I gave it 4 stars because a lot of what it has to communicate has already been, I think, internalized by society. I could see how this book would have been immensely polarizing, incendiary, and compelling at the time of its release, just because even now, to this day, the structure, the character work, everything about it, including the pacing and the shortness of it, is perfect. But I do think that everything sort of meaningful that it has to say with the character work is stuff we already know about for in terms of war, in terms of the military-industrial complex, what we know about PTSD, etc. So it's definitely a compelling read that I would recommend to people, but 5 stars for me, this is not. I read Sweetness of Water by Nathan Harris. I DNF'd this, gave it 2 stars because it was just not for me. It wasn't something that I read wholly through and disliked, which is usually what a 2-star is, but it's something that I didn't enjoy because I think that I couldn't accept the novel on its own terms to a degree. I wanted to get along with it, but the voice just wasn't there for me. And so it was kind of like both of our faults, maybe. And so I gave it 2 stars and moved on. Then I read Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. This book was great. It's unhinged woman at its best, basically. Short, non-novella, but not very long adult book either. It's about a young woman who's a daughter apprentice to her father, who's a healer. He's very strict, very domineering, very puritanical, and there's a lot of themes in it embedded about agency, autonomy, coming of age in a very strange way. It's very like sex positive in weird ways, And like I said, Unhinged, love it. I read Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. I gave this 3 stars because I re-listened to it on audiobook, and that's what enabled me to actually finish the book. I still think it's sort of a mediocre effort. It is very ambitious but doesn't fully execute on all of its themes. It's sort of Cloud Atlas-y in that it has multiple characters across timelines and has something to say about story itself, which is very ambitious, and about sort of utopias and critiquing it. But it was all just sort of fine, but I knew that I was going to forget it as soon as I finished it, basically, which is a lot of 3 stars for me. When you read 53 books in a month, the cream rises to the top. Astra by Cedar Bowers. This review is forthcoming in a couple days. I think this week it will be coming out. This is a Giller Prize book. It is a atemporal structure in which we're revolving around a single character, Astra. We follow her before she is even born and to old age, essentially, and we only get snippets of her life through other people. It's interesting, but felt like the perspective sort of was diminutive of a traumatic person, and why aren't we not centering Astra? Especially given the themes and the struggles in her life. It was a little bit frustrating sometimes, but I gave it 4 stars. Next is The Man Who Died Twice, Thursday Murder Club #2. This is a cozy murder mystery that improved on the first one greatly. It doesn't have to do all of the building up and characterization that the first one did, and there's a lot of connective tissue that goes into this that makes you feel rewarded for reading the first one. The plot is better, the murder is better, the murderers are better. There's, again, some great cozy vibes with positive masculinity. It is diametrically opposed to toxic masculinity despite some very masculine conflict being introduced in the story. So I thought it was fantastic. I gave it 5 stars. I believe I gave the first one 4 stars. I'm not sure. I DNF'd The Guest List by Lucy Foley at 25%. I thought this was just not well crafted, to be honest. It did not get going. I think it didn't even finish introducing all of the characters at that. The murder, I think, was barely happening, and it was contrived, predictable, annoying, etc. I then read Dear Cinthurin, a Black Spirit memoir by Akikwe Emezi. This is a 4-star read. Akikwe, they, them, I believe, for pronouns, is an exceptional writer. If you have read Freshwater, you definitely need to read this. It's definitely like those 2 books are in concert and in dialogue with one another. You learn so much about their spirituality, about their struggle with sort of mental health and the framing of that issue. So many interesting things. It is different in a memoir structure because they formulate as letters to various people that they know in their life, which oddly felt removed yet intimate, because you get the epistolary intimacy of being let in on somebody else's writing, but presumably it's also fiction, so there was a sort of dichotomy there that kind of broke my brain a little bit. I gave it 4 stars, loved it. I then read Fatty Legs 10th Anniversary Edition by Christy Jordan Fenton. This is fairly famous in Canada, though I hadn't heard of it. It is a residential school survivor story that's a little bit different because she actually wanted to go to the school, yet has bad experiences, not as bad as some others that I've read, but still traumatic, and almost seems like it's very generous in characterizing the school and the people. So it might have been that specific school that just wasn't as bad as others or something. But it's also meant for children, so who knows? I had no idea what to rate this book. I think it's important, required reading for children, for Canadians, etc. I gave it no stars because I just don't know how to rate it. And if you're curious, I'll link my review below as to my thinking with that, as with all of these. Next, I read Pet by Akikwe Emezi. This is a children's story about monsters that has a very interesting twist. It interrogates a lot of societal notions. It is still well crafted, but has a less interesting voice because it's for children. And so I gave it 4 stars, but it's definitely fun, interesting, emotive, and a good book. Next, I read Breathe by Joyce Carol Oates. Easy 4 stars. I don't know where the hate is coming from on this on Goodreads. She produces a lot, and so I think a lot of people conflate her with a Stephen King-ish thing where she's very uneven, and I don't know, maybe she is, but so far this is the 2nd book I've read of hers, and she's phenomenal, fantastic, awesome. She executes the theme perfectly. I don't know how you could read the blurb and expect something different. It's well written again, it's gut-wrenching, its characterization voice is particularly good as usual. The Beauty of Living Twice by Sharon Stone, which was a 5-star read, which should have been a 4-star read, but my thinking was it was so potent and interesting and far more of a generous offering of her life, despite all of the trauma that I had no idea about, which is a friggin' doozy. Content warnings for everything. Sexual assault. She has, in the beginning, I believe, lifelines to various things that sort of signal to the reader what this story is going to be about. Lifelines in terms of numbers that you can call on your phone for support. And so, from a craft-wise perspective, it's probably 4 stars, but I gave it 5 stars because she reads it herself, and she's phenomenal at reading. She chokes up about certain things. She's very candid. I believed what she was saying. It was a very fascinating life, I think. At the end of the review, I mentioned that I was cooking fish when I was listening to this, and it made me sob a little bit as I poked my fish, and so for that, it gets 5 stars. Truth Be Told by Kaya Abdullah. This I have a video on coming at the end of next month, I think it's scheduled for. It's fantastic. Gave it 4 stars. It's commercial fiction. It's well written. This is about a man who is just about to enter college. I think it's his last year of high school or prep for college, something like that. It's an Ivy League school, a boarding school. It's a launching pad to go into the Ivy Leagues, etc. When he goes to a party, he drinks too much, he goes home, he doesn't lock his door, a man comes in and assaults him, and it is about that. So it is a legal thriller about male rape, and it is very well done. The male victim has a Muslim background. The protagonist of the story and the viewpoint of which we view it is a person who is an advocate. It takes place in United Kingdom. I had never heard of this before, PS, where there are advocates for sexual assault victims that sort of coordinate all of the aspects of those cases, including finding a police officer that is well versed in it so they don't re-traumatize the victim, and can sort of offer services, help, support to people in need of that, which I thought was phenomenal. What ends up happening is the man presses charges against the other man, and we follow the court case of that, how it affects his identity, the toxic masculinity that he has internalized from his Muslim father, who is intense, capital I, intense. Yeah, I thought it was just great. It is very good and informative at packing in all of this very nuanced intersectionality about this stuff and packing in particular stats about male rape and why it goes unreported, etc. It is very good. Highly recommend it. I picked up the first book after this. I saw this on Lochan Reads, which I will link below, and if I forget to, please scream at me in the comments to do so, because she deserves a shout out for this for sure, and in general her channel is phenomenal. I then read What Storm, What Thunder by Miriam J.A. Chansey. This is a very interesting cli-fi book. I gave it 4 stars. non-linear, multi-point of view with a very central through line. In this, we follow a bunch of different narratives that revolve around, atemporally again, the lives of people affected by the Haitian earthquake that is famous now. And it jumps around quite interestingly to various people, and they are always either before the earthquake or after it. There might be one story that is during it. So it kind of progresses in a very strange manner to make very interesting points, especially about Tide Aid, especially about NGOs helping foreign countries and the way in which they don't help do that. And it's just very well written, very character based. I gave this 4 stars and quite liked it. It has some stories just with all short stories that don't connect as much as others. They're all interesting for the sum of its parts, but some of them actually feel like they don't really need to be there. So it was a 3.5 rounded up to 4, I believe, is what I chose. Next, I read Son of the House by Chiluchi Onyameluke Onyuba, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing and apologize for. I have posted a video on this already. I did not like it. I gave it 2 stars. Good story, poor novel, didn't like the craft work, and the craft work kind of went against the framing of the premise, which is 2 older women are kidnapped, one of which is well off, and when they are held in captivity, they each tell each other their life stories, and it diverts into the story into first-person narrative that doesn't sync up really with them telling the story to somebody else. It just feels like a completely different story, like airlifted into it. And then in later chapters, we get to a point where we are actually reading about the person telling the story that we just read chapters about previously. So it just felt a little weird. Next, I read The Shockwave Rider by John Brunner. This is a proto cyberpunk book that was fine, basically. It is very 70s sci-fi social spec novel, basically, is what I said. It has some interesting concepts, and I can see why it is proto-cyberpunk, and for me this is more of a academic, not being academic pursuit of trying to get a fuller picture of the subgenre, but it was better than I expected it to be for what it is, but still just a generic read, basically. The next is A Passage North, which I freaking loved. I have a video on this that is simply what I liked about A Passage North, because I don't know if there was anything I didn't. It is, if you need any encouragement to read it, please do so. They have fantastic videos scallywandling about the books, and Sean the Book Maniac talked about this in detail. I'll point to that instead because my video isn't out yet, but 5 stars, loved it. It's very interiority, stream of consciousness, male-centric point of view, and elucidates a lot about the country in interesting ways. Not much of a plot. Next, Fight Night by Miriam Taves, not Twos. I gave this 4 stars. I quite liked it after checking out the audiobook. The ebook didn't do it for me. It is about a young girl who stays at home after being suspended because she beat somebody up who was bullying her. The grandma tells her to fight back. She gets expelled. She ends up spending all her days with the grandmother. Though the characterization there and the relationship is phenomenal, the writing is reflective too much of the girl, though, in the sense that the sentences are quite like short, basic, uninteresting to me, so the audiobook was preferable. But overall it was a good story, and definitely worth consuming. Better than my expectations, which were exceeded. I definitely don't usually like child narrators, but if you're going to do it, this is a good example of doing it well. Next is What Strange Paradise by Omar El Akkad. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was sort of a generic immigrant story that was fine. It executed some things good, some things not so good. I posted a video on this 2 days ago or so check that out for more detail. Next, I read Frontera by Louis Scheiner, which is a sort of staple of first wave cyberpunk. It was quite good, I thought, but didn't, blow me away. It still is quite smart for what it was doing, especially for first wave. This is a story about, in the future of course, there's a Mars colony that goes dark. They don't know what happened to them. They send out a character who sees himself as like a hero basically to confront this notion. And he has an implant, and we learn that he has been implanted with like the hero archetype persona type thing. So in a fun way, the technology becomes a vehicle of interrogating the hero trope itself, and it's kind of subversively feminist almost. I think it doesn't go quite far enough, but the people that get shit done in this book are women, and the men kind of are trapped in this kind of stupid loop of trying to battle each other while the stakes are quite grand out here on Mars. And it was enjoyable in that way, in a meta way. The granular sentence by sentence and paragraph by paragraph was fine, but didn't blow me away again. And mostly it was just the themes that kept me there. Next, I read The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen. I hope I said that right. This I gave 2 stars. I didn't quite like it. It is very, very, very granular and somehow yet without description. I felt that the theme was commendable, but packaged in the format that it is through this person who is quite unlikable, uninteresting, very generic. It was just not compelling, despite the themes being very interesting and shedding a light on a lot of problematic stuff happening with America and the war. Next is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was beautifully written. This book is probably like the prototypical after-school special novel to me though. Black people were not characterized very well at all, nor were any of the tertiary characters. It is very explicit in its wording of what it's trying to get across. So what I would call prescriptivism. There was interesting plot happening, yet it also felt very like solipsistic. It was in its own head. Nothing else felt real. It had very specific things that it wanted to communicate, and very little else happened, except that the voice was just exceptional. It was a very pleasurable read, but felt very vapid to me, basically. Next, I read Apples Never Fall by Leanne Moriarty. This book was great. I gave it 5 stars. It is a very thorough examination of a family that is very problematic, rich, and is very toxic to each other in ways that they don't always pick up on. The book, again, is atemporal. It goes back and forth in time a lot. Between a detective who is trying to track if a woman has disappeared or died, the mother of this family, we get to know that a detail that happened previously, 4 months ago, I believe, a strange woman showed up on their doorstep and is taken in by the couple, and that introduction just throws the whole family out of whack. And then we cut back and forth between present and past, and we're constantly trying to figure out what happened to this woman. Very enjoyable. The characterizations of each was phenomenal. The relationships and the sort of traumas and the ways in which the B plots, of which there is one for basically every character, ties into the A plot was perfect, basically. Extremely enjoyable. Probably a part of it was I was just in the mood for this type of story as well. I could definitely see some people just rating it 4 stars instead of 5, but for me it was just ringing all the bells. I have a video on this coming next month at some point. The next is The Body Scout by Lynn and Michael. This is a cyberpunk book that just came out, biopunk specifically, a subgenre of a subgenre. It's third wave, meaning that it is not post-cyberpunk, critiquing cyberpunk, but it is aware of all the things that's come before and is clearly pandering to some and subverting others. I shouldn't say pandering, it's invoking them. It knows what it's doing and it's fun. It's noir, but kind of got a fun overtone to it. There's lots of jokes at some points. The tone constantly shifts back and forth. It is about a scout in the future who works for a baseball team, and the baseball team hires him not just for what we would describe as a scout. He tries to find people for the team that are like scientists, for instance, because people are being biohacked in this to be like high-functioning adults, basically, right? He was a former member of the Cybernetic League that was put to bed, basically, because of some problematic issues, and then they brought in people just doing high synthetic drugs, basically, to sort of simulate or approximate the cybernetic aspects that people have. And so there's a sort of schism in society that's against people who are getting cybernetics, and now biohacking is the way, basically. So he's a remnant of a past, and of course a staple of noir. His brother is a big-time player in another team, the Mets, I believe. He's a like big-time hitter, as in like he, you know, is one of those people that hit the ball real good. He's a heavy hitter for the team. He goes to bat and collapses and dies, basically, and he is hired by the other team to figure out what is going on. It's twisty, it's turny, it's pretty fun. I gave it 4 stars because it is not unpredictable. The characterization is pretty good, but I typically don't really go for books that switch tone that often. If I read a noir, I want it to be serious. So I liked what it was doing stylistically. I think it's a good addition to the subgenre. Next, I read 28 Far Cries by Mark Nash. Go check out my video on it. It's quick. You have no excuse. Fantastic, 5 stars. I don't want to go too into it because it'll just be a rabbit hole of me talking about all these different associations that I thought I saw in it. Fantastic book. Definitely buy it, read it. Next is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. I gave this 3 stars. This was definitely hindered by the consumption of it on audio. There was so much happening in the narrative that I kind of missed out on a lot of the interconnected stuff. For stuff that is complex, I typically need to consume it in print format. I ended up giving it 3 stars because, to be honest, it was just okay for me in the voice. And because the voice was only okay and it was narrated, it was hard to follow all of that complexity. And so it ended up being like buffered smooth for me, where I got the length of the actual plot and it seemed very simple to me. I didn't see how all of the connections were interesting in the same way that everybody else talks about it. So I assumed that it's the narration and how I consumed it. For me, it felt very straightforward, was very fluffed out, whereas other reviews thought that it was pared down so much that it was very tight. For me, a lot of it could have been cut out. Everybody seemed like cookie cutter archetypal type characters. It wasn't saying anything new, really, thematically. It was hard to care about the characters, and it was just fine. Next is The Apollo Murders, written by a Canadian, Chris Hadfield. I give this 3 stars. This was another audiobook, and it is kind of interesting in that it's like Cold War. There's an international incident in space between Russia and Americans, and a Russian ends up having to go into the American team in order to complete their mission and for all of them to survive. But there's the, you know, like why did this incident occur? Is the Russian the bad person? Are they going to kill people? What was the motivation for the event and all that kind of stuff. I thought it was very fun. It was commercial fiction. It does exactly what it sets out to do on the tin, basically. I then read The Employees by Olga Ravin. I have a video coming of this at the end of the month, I think, scheduled. I thought it was friggin' fantastic. 5 stars, easy 5 stars. The structure is different. Basically, it's about a futuristic vessel, a think Star Trek-ish type thing. The crew is populated by people who are born and not born, so humanoids and humans. And there's some very interesting like workplace dynamic stuff happening at the same time as they had brought in an outside external factor to their crew, picking up objects from a different planet on an away mission, basically. And it just really messes with the whole crew, and the structure is everybody is giving statements to an HR type person. And it's structured like that, non-chronologically, kind of. The records jump in number quite often and sometimes backtrack sometimes, but it is definitely arranged in a way that is trying to make the story approachable and linear in that way. So it was fascinating. It has so much to say about psychology, sociological stuff, about a critique of science fiction in itself, the hubris of man, so many things. It's exceptional science fiction, almost perfect, I would say. Next is There Is No Anti-Memetics Division by QNTM, who's an anonymous user, I think. This book was fine. I gave it 3 stars. The voice was kind of commercial fiction-y. He did some editing, show don't tell problems, but the story is really interesting. Really cool ideas, especially for science fiction. So this is about a woman who runs the anti-memetics division, but doesn't exist, basically, on paper, because the anti-meme by itself erases the context of which humans have perceived it. It functionally does not exist. And that division, which does not exist, battles anti-memes as well. And so there's a lot of Deus Ex Machina, because basically she has internalized how to deduce what is happening and then act on it. And because it's always something that you don't know about, or she has forgotten about, or whatever, it is usually a catch situations where like a gotcha moment where you think one thing is happening, it's another thing she acts, and then linearly we move. Halfway through the book, it takes a change that kind of works and kind of doesn't work. It was okay though. It was definitely worth reading, especially if you like big ideas in science fiction, even if they aren't executed perfectly. I gave this 3 stars, like I said. I have a video on it coming. Next, I read Black Buck by Matteo Ascari-Pour, I think. I have the picture next to me, I'm sure. Black Buck was interesting. It is a satire, ostensibly, about a happy young black man who's working at Starbucks, who gets offered a position at essentially like a hedge fund thing by a white bro guy. He essentially is reprogrammed by cultish and alt-right behaviorisms to become a good salesperson, to pass, to function in societally and, get that capitalism. It takes a weird twist halfway through, and it's strange because it sets up a ton of interesting themes that could have been executed on well in the first half and then leaves them by the wayside. Then in the second half, it introduces a few more and then also leaves them by the wayside for a gotcha twist moment at the end that was sort of predictable but too stupid to have happened, and yet it did, basically. I gave this 2 stars. I didn't like it. It had a lot of potential, but ended up being vapid and not actually executing on what it was trying to satirize. It was very frustrating. Next, I read Psychros by Charlene Elsby. I gave this 5 stars. My review of this is up in 2 days. This is an unhinged woman story as well. Friggin' love these this year. It has an excellent setup, excellent voice. It has a lot to say about psychology, sociology, and gender dynamics specifically, but the most interesting thing is it's about ostensibly a murderess, who is thinking quite rationally, actually, and it seems like it's such a compelling descent because she is sort of exercising her motivated thinking into getting her into these situations, and yet rationalization is always used as like the paragon of thought, and you couldn't possibly come to the wrong conclusion, some men on the internet say, by using solely logic. Guess they haven't seen Star Trek, even though they love it. Anyway, fantastic read. Check it out. I finished the Sword of Shannara trilogy. It's a thick-ass book. The Wish Song of Shannara was 3 stars for me. Again, this whole trilogy was 3 stars. Very basic 90s tropey fiction. It regurgitates a lot of tropes from what you would typically see in modern fantasy all of the time now. The Chosen One, lots of lineage stuff happening, but it's fun enough, and I mean, it's fine for what it is. It's trying to make fantasy accessible to young adults, and it did that and re-galvanized people into fantasy at the time. So, into that kind of fantasy, anyway. Next, I read The Strangers by Katharina Vermette, another Giller Prize book, so the video is coming out on that soon, probably at the end of the month or something. 4 stars, liked it quite a bit, frames Indigenous issues in Canada differently, especially from the penal system, which for some reason I hadn't really engaged with in other books. So it does feel fresh, does feel interesting, great characterization, lots of sociological issues, a tie-in with The Break, her other novel, very good. Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. This is about a woman who kind of finds her identity subsumed when she gives birth, and as she becomes more unhinged, more feral, as her family becomes like a sort of defaultism for the peddling of what the American family should look like and function like and whatnot, she has the interplay between losing her sense of self, trying to care for all of the time this little boy of hers while her husband's off making that bread. And it was just really interesting because she starts turning into a dog. And it has a lot of subtle, interesting things conveyed about motherhood, personhood, selfhood, feminism explicitly. And the voice is just exceptionally compelling in this. I have a video coming on it soon. Next, I read Fissions by Borges. 5 stars, kind of perfunctory, I guess. I have some thoughts on a video coming, and I'll leave it to that because it's a complex work to talk about. I thought it was phenomenal, though. I DNF'd Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This focuses on a narrative of a parent of a gay man who is murdered. He is out of prison. He has the toxic masculinity to take this on, and he tries to unravel the death, what has happened, what he can do about it. But the problem with this centrally is that suddenly he gives a shit about his gay son. Even his former wife critiques him on the fact that now he actually gives a shit about his son. And it's like the hardest leap for me to suddenly believe that this parent actually was doing this. In some ways it sort of makes sense because toxic masculinity from that age group is that when something's taken away from you, something that you made or whatever, then you would react in a way to punish the people responsible. So that kind of follows, but I still just didn't like the characters. didn't think it justified basically any aspect of the story. It was generic commercial fiction, person of color writing, person of color point of view, and Roxane Gay liked this book a lot, so I think if you were able to buy into the premise, which I was not, then you might like it. Next, I read The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. I gave this 3 stars. This is a Booker shortlister book, I think. This takes place in Ireland. It's a nurse dealing with people, mostly it seems like she is dealing with midwives at the time of the flu breakout. It has a compelling voice, interesting story somewhat. I gave it 3 stars. It is exactly what it says it is, but it didn't exceed my expectations. Okay, so the sun went down and I had to turn on the light. That's how long I've been talking. Excellent. Next, I read Dragman by Stephen Appleby. I first heard about this on Bob the Booker's channel, which is fantastic. You should check it out. You should check out his review too. This book I've been debating on whether or not to make a full video for, but I don't think I have too much to say on it. We'll see, I guess. I thought it was fine because A, it has an interesting concept for a superhero. It is about a middle-aged man with a family who used to be somebody who was questioning their identity such that they thought they were trans, but ended up cross-dressing. He finds that when he puts on women's clothing, he has access to superpowers, which is just a fantastic concept for a superhero. Having that inner strength by realizing your selfhood is just what the whole genre is about, basically. The problems that I have with it is that it is constantly not inclusive in its story, and it is by, I believe, an older person who is still questioning, but there's like pronouns are weaponized against the person, which is reflective of the sort of realism aspects that it's going for. But the problem is that we don't get a frame of reference for it, because even Dragman themselves doesn't codify their own pronouns. They're still kind of questioning. They don't get the chance to embody a trans identity young. They're sent to a psychologist that drills them that out of them. And so he doesn't choose pronouns, and he calls himself Drag Man. So presumably he's accepting of the he pronoun, but it's never actually talked about, right? And so when you're talking about embodiment and sort of an aspirational take in the sense of a superhero, and kids consuming this essentially, or teenagers at least, it feels very muddied. And like, I understand the wanting to portray your own story in the way that it sort of happened in real life, but there is the supernatural element of the superhero already, right? So I actually think this would be a good story for older queer people who are potentially on a similar questioning path as Stephen Appleby. I think teenagers might rip this apart for the sort of non-inclusivity properties that is imbued in it. For instance, Stephen Appleby has allowed the killer of trans people that he, Dragman, the character, is fighting and looking for in the story, because trans people are being killed in the community. The killer has a perspective that is given the most voice in dialogue in the book, and then also is present during that in weird ways, because at one point they call somebody a transvestite, which is an antiquated term that nobody should use for cross-dressers. It is a word that was used in therapy to denote perversion, basically, and so it should not be used again in anybody's lexicon whatsoever. And yet the killer uses it as well as a term of empowerment for Dragman when he is talking to a friend about his cross-dressing. So it feels very antiquated in that sense. Overall, I think it is still positive. It comes out as 3 stars for me, but I don't feel like I'm the person to really evaluate it properly either. But basically, I think it has some very interesting themes that are very interestingly actualized, but it doesn't quite pull off much beyond just limping by a passing grade for me. Also, it is always 9 panel, and it gets really boring to look at a craft-wise perspective. It only switches it up like once or twice, basically. Next, I read M by Kim Twee. I have a video on this coming out because it's a long-listed Giller Prize book. 5 stars, fucking phenomenal. Definitely read this book. I'm definitely going to read all of her other stuff. It is a self-portrait of Vietnam at a very specific time when the war, I believe, is still happening, but it flits in and out of these non-linear narratives. It feels like snapshots of lives that coalesce in very interesting ways. They're vivid, poetic, lyrical, fantastically written, and very well narrated by the author herself on the audiobook. Next is An Island by Karen Jennings. I have a video on this coming out. I gave it 4 stars. It's a Booker long-listed book that I could see why it is. It's very interesting. It's almost an immigrant experience from a person who's native to a specific region that isn't, I don't think, ever really codified. There is a tyrannical rule from a dictator that really affects the person's life, but interestingly, we meet them first on an island as a lighthouse keeper, as an old man. He ends up finding an immigrant, and we find out that a lot of immigrants wash up onto this shore, but this one is alive, and him being nurtured back to health upends his sort of like delicate balance with the island and his own thoughts, the ecology of the island, in some very interesting ways. I really liked that. And yeah, 4 stars, thought it was great. I then DNF'd a book, a cyberpunk book that I was reading, Behind Blue Eyes. This was going for a really sort of campy anime, sort of more fun than philosophical, at least at the point that I got to, version of kind of like Ghost in the Shell, but more action, more playfulness, more fun, and I just wasn't in the mood for anime camp, and so I DNF'd it with no stars because I couldn't accept it as it was actually trying to engage with me, and so it wouldn't have been fair to actually rate it. I might pick it up at a later date when I'm in the mood for that, though. Next is Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. I gave this 3 stars. Very compelling voice, but the verisimilitude was way too granular for me. Some of the stuff was interesting in these sort of vignettes, other stuff not as much. I found it very interesting and provocative at some points and dull and boring at others. Similarly, Rachel Cusk's Second Place, the first novel that I've consumed by her and by audio. Really good narration, 2.5 stars rated, up to 3 stars, just barely passing for me. Didn't like the character very much, didn't think the themes were very interesting, or at least their execution. The theme actually is a bit interesting to me, but I don't know, there's something about this that just made it blah to me, and I couldn't really codify what that was. I think when that happens, usually it is simply that the voice is uninteresting to me and I'm unable to like grasp very particular details about what is happening in the plot and the theme, etc. So I don't know, it was just a weird one for me. Next is Eating Habits of the Chronically Lonesome by Megan Gale Coles, author of Small Game Hunting at the Local Coward Gun Club. This is a short story collection of hers. It's 4 stars. The voice that she uses in Small Game Hunting is coming along here. This is like 6 years prior, something like that. There is some definite themes that run in it similarly to Small Game Hunting, but it was something that I should have started with instead of small game hunting, because the contrast is a little bit glaring. But it was still exceeded my expectations in that some stories were just exceptionally strong. Of course, others are not, just like every short story collection for me. But there's some very interesting things to say, and the fact that it's all grounded around eating habits was just a meta tart for me, basically. Next read Glorious Frazzled Beings by Angelique Lalonde. This is a video that is coming because it's a Giller Prize longlisted book. I gave it 2 stars. I didn't like it. It's a short story collection that doesn't feel cohesive. The voice ranges wildly into all of them. I think it is trying to be far more eclectic than it has the chops to do, basically. Some of the stories were good, but as I kept going, it became more and more grating, and the stories were obviously going against convention for the point of going against convention instead of having any craft that had scaffolding for it. So I thought it was very interesting stylistically, but not ultimately pulled off. 2 stars. Next is The Push by Ashley Audrain. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. This is an interesting psychological thriller about a woman who has a daughter who she is sort of suspicious with from the get-go. She feels like her daughter isn't behaving like normal kids and sort of is performing in a kind of like horror, my kid's weird kind of way, but not horror. It's all from the point of the mom's perspective. It's more tense and like paced like a thriller. Everything is 4 or 5 pages and you're on to the next thing. It's addictive to consume. It was ultimately fine. I gave it 3 stars. What the inciting incident is they go to a coffee place, and this is after she has a son who she really adores and is contrasted with her daughter, and the daughter ostensibly pushes the stroller of the kid into traffic and the kid dies, and it's the family dealing with all of that stuff. The next is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. 4 stars, don't have anything to say about this. It exceeded my expectations. Great voice, great theme. I think it validates its position as being in the canon. It's not a perfect book for sure, I think, but it is sort of commendable that it lives up to the wild expectations that I had for it. For all classics, basically, I think that they need to continually justify their spot in the canon, and I think this does it. Next is Swimming Back to Trout River by Linda Ray Fung. This was great, another long-listed Giller book that I have made a video on and will be coming at some point in the future. Immigrant story from China, very different, again, non-linear. All of the characters are well realized, and it goes from the 60s to the mid-80s, I believe. Perspectives of different generation, especially during the Cultural Revolution in China, and then immigrant story that is remixed because they have past trauma that we learn about in bite-sized pieces that make it so that they are estranged from each other, even in the new country, America, and they have left behind their daughter to be raised by their grandparents. And so it's just a really interesting story. I really liked it. It's a compelling piece overall. I gave it 4 stars. Next is a graphic novel, Fictional Father by Joe Allman. It's the first one that I've read by that person. It's a Canadian who is listed for the Governor General Award. This was a very strange graphic novel. Again, only 9 panels, which I hate. It is very meta. It's about a self-inserted author who talks about having a father who is a cartoonist that is famous, being in their shadow, as a gay young man to an adult, and trying to like make his own way, but it's hard to connect with him because he's rich, kind of shitty. And what's weird is the characters in the story continually point that out to him, so I think he thinks it's more humorous than it actually is. It just pointed out that, yeah, I don't like this person, I don't care about this person even more. And the last book I read, just finished today, My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. 5 stars. I thought this was phenomenal. It follows 2 friends, best friends, basically, maybe only friends that they have, from the perspective of a particular person who diegetically in the story is the author of what we are reading as well. So we find her as a schoolgirl learning about her love for literature and to start writing. And it's just their adolescence. This town is well rendered. The voice is super compelling for the character and the point of view. Everything about it was just really great, I thought. And it's one of those stories where the author can just talk about whatever they want and you'd consume it because the voice is just so convincing and interesting. I found it very psychological. I found the interplay between the 2 girls and how they pull each other into certain aspects and choices in their lives and what brings them together and apart was just perfect again. And I'm definitely going to read the next book. And that's it. That's my wrap up. Hopefully it was not forever.